The tense atmosphere of the year-end special exam was ongoing. Each moment was captured by strategically placed cameras. From every angle, the relentless gaze of the lenses missed nothing, recording even the smallest details. On the monitors, the clash of ideas and strategies played out, a spectacle of calculated words and sharp wit. It was a one-on-one showdown between representatives, a duel where interference was strictly forbidden. Even the homeroom teachers had been kept in the dark about the full extent of the exam and its rules. Yet, despite the unexpected, the students faced it with determination. Chie Hoshinomiya stood amidst the unfolding drama, holding her breath and her mounting frustration hidden behind a carefully composed facade. She had only one wish: for her class to emerge victorious. She clenched her teeth so hard that a sharp ache spread through her jaw, but the pain barely registered. If there was even the slightest way to influence the outcome of this special exam, she was ready to do whatever it took. No measure seemed too extreme. Since the rules of the year-end special exam that had been explained to the teachers beforehand allowed for some degree of involvement. But when the exam finally began, it turned out to be something entirely different. The school provided no explanation for the sudden change in plans, leaving the reason unknown. Not only Hoshinomiya, but all teachers involved with the second-year students were kept in the dark. However, now she understood the reason. The reason was this foreign figure seated calmly nearby, a supposed observer whose presence felt anything but passive. This so-called observer had distorted everything, twisting the exam into something unrecognizable. Why? Hoshinomiya's voice was a fragile whisper, barely escaping her lips. Just when hope had appeared after Horikita Suzune was defeated, it happened. Kiyotaka Ayanokoji had stepped forward with a demeanor far beyond that of any student, his ruthless strategies leaving no room for mercy. Before him, Ichinose had already given in, her defeat etched into the scene as if it had been inevitable from the start. This isn't fair. Not like this. Though her voice reached no one, she couldn't contain her despair. A single, overwhelming presence had shifted the balance, a joker within the deck. The strongest card held by Chabashira was an insurmountable advantage, forcing her to confront the hopeless reality. Watching through the monitor, there was nothing Hoshinomiya could do. The result was decided. This concludes the year-end special exam. Well done, everyone. Chairman Sakayanagi, the school's director, made this announcement. The visiting man, who had been observing the outcome of the special exam alongside 4 homeroom teachers and several men in black suits, slowly rose from the luxurious chair he had been seated in. The black-suited individuals waiting behind him hurriedly began preparing for his departure as soon as they noticed. Thank you, Chairman Sakayanagi, for arranging everything so flawlessly this time. In front of him were a cup of coffee served in what appeared to be an incredibly expensive cup and beautifully crafted confections of a kind rarely seen. Though he had barely touched them, he extended his hand toward Sakayanagi as a gesture of gratitude. Sakayanagi quickly grasped the offered hand and bowed deeply. Not at all, Prime Minister Kijima. It is we who are truly grateful for your visit today. The current Prime Minister, Kijima. A supporter of advanced nurturing high school, he had come specifically to observe the special exam. Faced with this, even Hoshinomiya had no choice but to accept it. When the Prime Minister himself decides to visit, no one would be surprised by any changes made to accommodate him. Kijima's gaze returned to the monitor. On the screen, Ayanokoji was seen leaving the room, leaving behind Ichinose, who sat frozen in shock, unable to even stand. It's truly unfortunate that there were expulsions, but I respect the decision to allow full freedom in how the rules were applied. We greatly appreciate you saying that. It's a relief for our school as well. In fact, we received strong encouragement from Minister Ogiso to operate without fear of expulsion risks. Kijima gently interrupted Sakayanagi, who had started to explain the situation regarding the expelled students. The teachers exchanged glances, quickly realizing that Ogiso referred to the Minister of Education. I understand. However, I trust that proper support will be provided for the expelled students, correct? Of course, we will immediately find suitable schools for their transfer, considering both their academic abilities and personalities. Good. Please take care of it, Kijima said as he checked the time on a modest-looking wristwatch and then turned to leave. Sakayanagi hurried to follow him. As planned, we will visit again on April 1st. Thank you for your continued cooperation. Naturally, President Koenji also seems eager to meet with you, Prime Minister Kijima. That's wonderful to hear. It's been 3 years since we last met, so I'm looking forward to it as well. As they finished their conversation, Sakayanagi and Kijima left the room. The remaining 4 homeroom teachers, finally freed from the heavy atmosphere, let out a collective sigh of relief. Congratulations, Seichan. At least for now, you're in Class A. I'd like to thank you, but the exam has only just ended. And then there's Maizono, who ended up being expelled. I can't celebrate so easily. A single student's expulsion outweighed the joy of advancing to Class A? Was that really what she meant? Hoshinomiya felt a surge of irritation at Chabashira's serious response. Deep down, she couldn't help but think, she must be mocking me for constantly falling behind. Or perhaps I'm not even worth her attention. The frustration swelled within her, and with it, a growing resentment. I'll never let this woman win. I cannot allow her to graduate from Class A. That determination, almost hatred, had grown far stronger than it was before the exam. March 14th. The year-end special exam had just ended as the sun was setting. The representatives of each class, still grappling with their emotions, were sent back to their respective classrooms. Or rather, it was likely the participants, more than the representatives, who were struggling to process the situation. After all, they had to piece together the entire picture, what had transpired behind the scenes, and how the outcome was decided. It wasn't enough to simply conclude who won or lost. They needed to understand the events that unfolded during the exam. On the way back to the classroom, where the participants awaited, it was clear that Horikita and Yosuke had many questions about my face-off with Ichinose. However, with Chabashira-sensei walking alongside us, they stayed silent for the entire journey. Unable to bear the silence, Chabashira-sensei was the first to speak. Just so we're clear, this special exam was highly unusual compared to previous years. The information possessed by you representatives and the participants already waiting in the classroom is fundamentally different. The only common ground you all share is the knowledge of your class's victory or defeat and the existence of those who were expelled. I won't be the one providing a detailed explanation of these points after we return to the classroom. The true rules, or rather, the rules given exclusively to the representatives, it's fine for us to explain those to the participants to clear up any misunderstandings. Right? Of course. How to handle that is for you to decide. Once we return to the classroom, the session will be dismissed, but it's better to discuss anything you're concerned about and resolve it while you still can. Just before placing her hand on the classroom door, Chabashira-sensei turned back and offered this advice to Horikita. Yes, that's my intention. Besides, we, the representatives, also don't know the specifics of each other's battles. I think it's important to share information. Each representative had their own approach and actions during the test, but these details remain unknown to one another. That said, the focus is undoubtedly on uncovering the details of the clash between Ichinose and me. The only thing that's clear is the outcome. Ichinose was defeated, and Maizono was forced into expulsion. You'll take the time to explain things too, Ayanokoji-kun, right? Of course. I have no intention of ending the day with any questions remaining. With my agreement, Horikita gave a small nod, seeming to reassure herself, and Yosuke followed suit. Together with our teacher, the 3 representatives returned to the classroom. The moment we entered, the participants who had been waiting greeted us with a mix of curious and expectant stares. Having had their confiscated phones returned, the students powered them on. Shortly after, my own phone buzzed with an incoming message. I gave it a quick glance before tucking it back into my pocket. Chabashira-sensei, addressing the still visibly shaken students, spoke in a calm tone. The year-end special exam has concluded with your victory. Thanks to this, Class 2B has earned significant class points. Next month, you'll likely rise to A class for the first time as third years. However, it's worth noting that Maizono's expulsion occurred during this process. While it's difficult for me to stand here and openly celebrate, I still want to commend you all for the hard work you put into this exam. In a situation where outright celebration would be inappropriate, Chabashira-sensei acknowledged their efforts while maintaining a measured tone. However, joy was far from the mood in the classroom. The sense of victory hadn't fully sunk in, and Maizono's expulsion cast a heavy shadow. To jump into jubilant celebration now would undoubtedly invite criticism. Instead, an air of restrained eagerness filled the room, as everyone was desperate to uncover the full story. Is Maizono really expelled, sensei? Amid the hesitation of most students to ask directly, Sudo was the first to speak up. You're half right and half wrong. Maizono is indeed in the process of completing the expulsion procedures in the faculty office. However, if you can pool together the necessary private points here and now, the expulsion can still be avoided. While it wouldn't have been unusual for her to confirm first, it was clear that she already had a grasp of the class's total private points. Given that it likely fell far short of the required 20 million points, this was more of a formality. Offering Maizono false hope would only make things crueler in the end. Even if the class were to push themselves to save her, it wouldn't be enough. Collecting the missing private points from other classes or grades on such short notice was practically impossible. Preventing the expulsion was not an option. The only choice left was to silently accept the outcome. Will we be able to see her if we wait? This hesitant question came from Michan, her voice filled with anxiety. Despite Maizono's strong-willed personality and Michan's timid nature, the two surprisingly got along well, often spending time together. It was natural for her to struggle with the sudden separation. I'm not sure. At the very least, not immediately. She's just been told she's expelled and is understandably shaken. Until she calms down, it's unlikely. Hearing about Maizono's distress caused the classmates to exchange uneasy glances. There are probably a lot of things you're wondering about, but I'm not allowed to disclose the details. If you have questions, I suggest discussing them amongst yourselves after this. That's all from me, Shabashira-sensei concluded, cutting the discussion short. It seemed she was being considerate of what was to come. Horikita, with a quick request for permission, stepped up to the teacher's podium. I'm sorry, but could I ask everyone to stay here for a while? You're going to tell us about what happened with Maizono's expulsion, right? Nishimura, who had clearly been waiting for this moment, asked impatiently. Yes, I've decided that it wouldn't be right to leave any unresolved questions about the year-end special exam. But I can't do this alone. I need everyone's cooperation, Horikita said with her gaze moving across the room. Maizono, now absent from the class, the price of victory, a muddy, unclear battle with details unknown. Even someone like Quenji might have stood up by now, but there was no sign of that. Glancing at him, I saw that he was gazing into a handheld mirror, seemingly captivated by his reflection. Whether he was genuinely uninterested in the details of the exam, or simply so absorbed in admiring himself that he hadn't listened to the teacher, or Horikita was unclear. Either way, it seemed he would stay put for the time being. Including myself, I want to clear up the things that concern us the most. She began by explaining the discrepancies in information between the representatives and the participants to bridge the gap. Who knew what and who didn't? What were the rules that determined the outcome? By eliminating these gaps, the situation gradually became clearer. Yusuke candidly admitted that his strategy during the exam didn't go as planned. Horikita reflected on how she was successful up to her consecutive wins, but suffered a total defeat against Ichinose, the captain. And then, all attention shifted forward. To me, the class began focusing on how I, their leader, completely neutralized Ichinose, who Horikita had described as a formidable opponent. While this led to Maizono's expulsion, even the representatives, Horikita and Yusuke, did not know the full story. Maizono's situation couldn't be ignored. It was a matter we had to address head-on. In my opinion, while the role of the traitor did indeed carry the risk of expulsion, if the rules had been fully understood, the risk could have been almost zero. I believe Maizono, and even Ayanokoji-kun, knew that perfectly well. With my name mentioned, the class's gazes shifted toward me. Using Horikita's words as a prompt, I rose from my seat and walked toward her to address everyone. Shabashira-sensei, who could have left, instead chose to remain and observe the discussion. First, I'd like to apologize for the sudden expulsion of one of our classmates, I said, bowing my head deeply. Following the usual approach, I prioritized explaining everything step by step. The traitor role came with both risks and rewards. If identified as the traitor, the student would be expelled. However, if they remained undetected, they would earn either 5 million private points or 50 class points. Regardless of what Maizono intended to do, it's only natural to at least consider claiming the reward. But given the nature of the role, the longer a traitor stays in their class, the more information they inevitably leak to the opposing class. Therefore, the only surefire way to secure a legitimate victory is to force an early confession and resolve the matter quickly. Both Horikita and Yusuke, as representatives, would have considered this approach from the outset. Similarly, participants likely would have confessed immediately if they had been the traitor. I think Horikita, as someone who faced Ichinose directly, understands this. Ichinose was an unimaginably formidable opponent in this special exam. Would you agree with that assessment? Yes, she was strong. I couldn't see any way to beat her. Horikita replied, reaffirming her defeat without hesitation. I nodded in acknowledgement. I felt the same. Before facing her, I thought I might find a way to manage, but as soon as the one-on-one match began, I realized it. This exam was the perfect stage for Ichinose to maximize her abilities. She knew everything about both allies and enemies, capable of exposing both truth and lies with her keen insight. Beside me, Horikita closed her eyes and nodded, likely recalling her own experience during the exam. There was no chance of winning through conventional methods, but as the appointed leader, I had to think of a way to win. After desperately brainstorming with the limited time I had, I came up with only one method. I paused briefly, allowing my words to sink in before continuing. And that method was to expel the traitor at an early stage. Naturally, this statement caused the entire class to freeze in confusion. It was only natural for them to question what I meant by that. Are you saying that expelling Maizono, the traitor, led to victory? How does that work? It was Horikita who voiced the obvious question. Even if I fought her head-on, I didn't have the skill to defeat Ichinose. So I decided that the only way to win was to catch her off guard with an unexpected strategy. Early on, I approached Ichinose with a proposal to mutually use up our traitor privileges. If both sides lost that advantage, there would be no handicap, and no one would face expulsion. For someone like Ichinose, who likely believed she could win through conventional methods, it would have been an appealing proposition. Ichinose despises sacrificing her teammates, or rather, she opposes anyone's expulsion altogether. Everyone in the class has sensed this over the past 2 years, so it hardly needed explanation. My plan was to exploit that traitor privilege to make Ichinose unwittingly assist in Maizono's expulsion. That was the only strategy I could think of. A brief commotion erupted in the classroom. Some understood my explanation, others did not. Some found themselves caught in between. Shabashira-sensei, observing the situation objectively, remained calm. To mutually use traitor privileges, certainly, against Ichinose, such a strategy might work. And indirectly, it would mean Ichinose had a hand in Maizono's expulsion. That was your aim, Horikita said as her understanding was quicker than the participants. When Ichinose realized that she had unknowingly played a role in Maizono's expulsion, she was deeply shaken. Overwhelmed by guilt, she could no longer perform at her best and failed to make sound decisions during the final nominations. This was the explanation behind the outcome. Wait a moment. Yosuke, unable to hold back, stood up abruptly. I was allowed to represent the class, though I wasn't much help. I understand I don't have the right to complain or criticize. But was it really worth sacrificing a classmate? Even if expelling Maizono guaranteed a 100% victory, I find it hard to agree. And what if we had lost? Isn't that a possibility worth considering? No matter how you frame it, this feels like overstepping the boundaries of what's acceptable, even as a representative. That's true, isn't it? Considering Ichinose's personality, she'd definitely be shaken if she found out she was made to help with Maizono's expulsion. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee our victory, right? One of the students, Ichihashi, murmured in agreement. Exactly. You could call it hindsight, but at the time, I had to decide, should we struggle aimlessly and lose, or take a calculated risk even if it required a sacrifice? As the class representative, as the leader, I chose the latter, because losing here could have been catastrophic. If, as predicted, Class A had won and we lost, the gap in class points would have been 300. There's no guarantee we could recover that within a year. This exam, above all, was a battle we couldn't afford to lose. Although part of the reasoning was a lie, there was no falsehood in the background that led to Maizono's expulsion. To lose without making any sacrifices, or to aim for victory, even if it meant making one. There's no universally correct answer to such a question. However, the harsh reality is that losing would have set the class far back on its path to Class A. I'm not trying to justify myself, but I wouldn't mind putting it to a vote right here. I don't think most of you would agree that it was better to lose the exam than to sacrifice Maizono. The classroom fell silent. Students exchanged glances or looked away. Their reluctance to take a vote was plain to see. Not that Horikita would ever actually hold such a vote. It would only inflict unnecessary pain, and everyone already knew the outcome. As bitter as it was, the fact that the class had won was significant. A world where Sakayanagi won and Horikita lost. Avoiding that outcome was crucial, a calculation no one could ignore. And for many, the fact that they themselves weren't the sacrifice was also impossible to disregard. To oppose this now would mean reconsidering the sacrifices others had made, like Sakura's. Even so, if someone were to voice strong opposition, Isn't that just too arrogant? Kiyotaka, this wasn't a decision you should have made alone. You didn't have the right to sacrifice Maizono, not even as the class representative. Only someone like Yosuke, who prioritizes others over himself, could make such an argument. I had anticipated such a rebuttal. You're right, but since I couldn't consult anyone, I had no choice but to decide alone. And as someone entrusted with the class's future, I believed my priority was to secure victory for the class. I directly countered Yosuke's argument with my own stance. But thinking about Maizono, who was randomly chosen, there's a reason it was Maizono. I cut him off preemptively, knowing that this question would inevitably arise from someone. Why Maizono? That point would need to be addressed eventually. So I interrupted Yosuke's speech in advance. When I chose the sacrificial candidate, it wasn't based on personal feelings like liking or disliking my classmates. Rather, it stemmed from a strong sense of dissatisfaction and unease. It wasn't, as you might think, because Maizono was incompetent that I chose her. Are you saying there was a reasonable explanation behind the scenes? Horikita tried to stay calm, realizing there was a deeper meaning to my words. The reason the student I expelled was Maizono is because I explained that during the special exam at the end of the school year, a critical piece of class information had been leaked. The fact that I was participating as the commander for our class. I also revealed that it was Maizono who leaked it. Didn't Horikita specifically say this had to remain absolutely confidential? Ichihashi, who had just voiced opposition earlier, recalled the recent events and added her thoughts. Yes, this was originally something I asked Horikita to handle. One of the reasons for making me the representative and having me act as the commander was to catch our opponents off guard. When everyone expected Horikita to take the role, introducing an unexpected element could lead to overthinking on their part. I aimed to use this strategy to unsettle Ichinose and her classmates. If the plan succeeded, we could win without losing any students to expulsion. But the information was leaked to their class the day before the exam, not on the day itself. So the information was leaked at an early stage, and it was Maizono who leaked it. Yes, despite emphasizing that this strategic information was crucial to victory and must not be shared, it still ended up in another class's hands. Once I realized this, I began investigating. Sudo, who seemed to have doubts about this, raised his hand while seated and began speaking. Do you have any proof that Maizono leaked it? Even if you do, where did you get such evidence? I mean, it's not like Maizono would just expose herself that easily, right? Sudo, who had been listening carefully and processing the conversation, asked a question I was glad to hear. To explain this, I first need to address why Maizono would leak class information. It's hard to imagine her sharing such information with another class without reason, isn't it? Sudo and the other students nodded in agreement after hearing this. Does anyone here know that Maizono and Hashimoto are dating? I didn't go into details and simply posed the question. Most of the students looked surprised and exchanged glances, clearly unaware of this fact. However, a small number of students did know. Kushida and Matsushita raised their hands from their seats. After some hesitation, Komiya also raised her hand, making a total of 3 people. Kushida, as expected, lived up to her reputation. Despite her true nature being exposed to the class, she continued to demonstrate exceptional information-gathering abilities. Matsushita, on the other hand, likely deduced the relationship between Maizono and Hashimoto based on my investigation of Maizono before the exam. Komiya probably knew because she was close to Maizono, and Maizono had confided in her. Hashimoto is well known for gathering all sorts of information, including from his own class. He deliberately used Maizono to extract information about our class. So her boyfriend asked her to do it? Is that what you're saying? I think their relationship as a couple was intended for that purpose from the start. If Maizono or anyone close to her found out about this, they would likely be deeply hurt. However, the more one understands Hashimoto's nature, the more plausible this kind of behavior seems. To make my point more convincing, I turned to Sudo, who had raised the question. Sudo, have you and a few others been gathered by Maizono before to discuss matters about me? Sudo tilted his head in confusion, as if he couldn't recall right away. But when I listed the names of the participants and the dates, he seemed to remember. Yeah, that did happen. How do you even know about that? While I didn't know exactly what was discussed during that gathering, since the conversation revolved around me, it wasn't surprising that some sort of confidentiality was enforced. This also explained why Sudo seemed surprised that I'd obtained such information. I found out that the gathering wasn't Maizono's idea. It was all orchestrated by Hashimoto behind the scenes. Hearing this, Sudo was speechless, and Ike opened his mouth in shock. Wait, how does Ayanokoji even know about this? Wasn't this supposed to be confidential? I had anticipated this reaction as soon as the topic was brought up. Ideally, it wouldn't be me providing the answer. It would come from someone else voluntarily stepping forward. It was me. What Ayanokoji-kun said is absolutely true. Not a single detail is wrong. Matsushita raised her hand confidently, acting as a witness without hesitation. Her timing was perfect, and her judgment of the situation was spot on. At this point, not everyone was convinced, but it was enough to quiet most of the dissenters. The reasoning for expelling Maizono had been sufficiently explained. There was no need for every student to agree. It was enough for a portion of them to accept it. Some would inevitably continue harboring doubts, but that was fine. In fact, having around half the class convinced was the ideal outcome for the class's future as well. I guess I'll accept it, but can I say something else? Though Pseudo claimed he accepted it, he clearly had more to say. He stood up, pushing his chair back, and voiced his thoughts. I know you gave it your all for the class's victory. Your plan was derailed because Maizono leaked the information, and Ichinose turned out to be stronger than expected. You even took on the burden of hurting a classmate to see things through. But was expelling Maizono really the only option? I mean, it's you, Ayanokoji. I feel like you could have come up with a way to win without sacrificing anyone. Pseudo had seen enough of my abilities to believe I could have found a better solution. His perspective, that it might have been possible to win without expelling anyone, wasn't a bad one, and he wasn't entirely wrong. While it would have lowered the odds of success, it wasn't impossible to achieve victory without losing a student. Just as I considered giving an ambiguous response, someone else stepped forward. Ayanokoji-kun is certainly capable of leading as a commander, but even so, the opponents were incredibly strong. I can attest to that because I faced them directly. I realized quickly that I couldn't win against Ichinose. Before we switched strategies, I was convinced Ayanokoji-kun would lose too. That's how devastating this defeat was for me. As a leader, Horikita carried the weight of her responsibilities into the battle. Despite her strong resolve, she had been easily crushed, and the pressure she felt was immense. Seriously? Ichinose is that strong? Normally, Ichinose doesn't come across as intimidating or powerful. That's precisely why Horikita's straightforward account of her strength resonated with the others. I'd like to add something as well. I saw Ichinose's strength firsthand, and I can't blame Ayanokoji-kun for his decision. In fact, after seeing the outcome, I now believe this was the best choice possible. This was an unavoidable path for the class to win. As the class leader, Horikita gave her firm approval. Of course, it wasn't something to celebrate openly. Avoiding expulsions had always been her duty. But she also understood that this painful outcome had to be accepted, because no matter what anyone said now, Maizono wouldn't return. Instead of dwelling on the past, it was time to look forward. All right, if the class leader herself says so, I'll support it too. Ayanokoji really did fight for the class, even if it meant being resented by his own teammates. With that, Pseudo nodded and sat back down, fully accepting the situation. His question and Horikita's response had surprised me slightly. I'd expected the class to be evenly split, but the majority now leaned toward acceptance. Criticism toward me didn't escalate as much as I had anticipated. Just as I considered whether to stoke the fading tension, someone spoke up hesitantly. But, doesn't this mean 3 people have been expelled from our class so far? Yamauchi, Sakura, and now Maizono. All of them are connected to Ayanokoji-kun, aren't they? Although the words were vague, Azuma pointed out the pattern. What exactly are you implying? Matsushita's gentle tone belied the sharpness of her question as she countered Azuma's claim. I'm not saying anything in particular, it's just, when you think about it as a coincidence, it seems like too many to ignore. His phrasing was clumsy, but his point was clear. Was it really just coincidence? Are you suggesting Ayanokoji is deliberately causing expulsions? Pseudo, now firmly on my side, casually dismissed Azuma's concern. I'm not saying that, I'm just wondering, could we end up as the next sacrifices? Yeah, I kind of get where Azuma's coming from, Mori interjected, echoing his unease. It's a little unsettling, to be honest. Their concerns weren't unfounded, but they lacked strong arguments to back them up, making it difficult for their opposition to gain traction. I'm not sure if it's my place to speak, but can I say something? Kushida's voice cut in, her tone ambiguous. Was she an angel or a devil? I think the idea that Ayanokoji-kun is purposely causing expulsions is wrong. For example, Sakura's expulsion was entirely my fault. I betrayed the class due to my obsession with Horikita, and that led to the expulsion. If I had followed the majority, no one would have been expelled. Yamauchi's betrayal was similar. And as for Maizono, she made her own mistakes, which led to this outcome. Ayanokoji-kun didn't have a choice. He just cleaned up the mess others left behind. Shouldn't we view his actions in a more positive light? Kushida explained, emphasizing that each expulsion had been a necessary step to save the class. Coming from someone who had caused one of these incidents, her words carried significant weight. With Kushida and Matsushita supporting me, Azuma and the others reluctantly lowered their hands. At that moment, a male student stood up and opened the classroom door. "Where are you going, Koenji?" Sudo was the first to notice something unusual and called out to Koenji. "Going? I believe it's time for me to take my leave. We're not done talking yet. I have a date with a lovely lady, and I was merely passing the time here before then. I'd rather not be late, so I'll excuse myself now." True to his nature, Koenji, who had been either gazing into a mirror or fiddling with his phone, clearly had no intention of waiting for the discussion to end. He was simply acting on his own schedule. Technically, Chabashira-sensei had already ended the class meeting, so leaving the classroom wasn't an issue. As always, he does whatever he wants. Don't you realize how important this discussion is? Important? I fail to see anything remotely significant about it. With that, Koenji dismissed Sudo's protest and strolled out of the classroom. The atmosphere in the room was disrupted. Seeing this, Chabashira deemed it the right time to step in and address the class. Koenji aside, let's wrap this up for now. As the homeroom teacher, Chabashira-sensei decided to temporarily end the discussion rather than leaving it entirely to the students. "I agree. Unless someone insists on continuing, let's call it a day," she added. Hearing this, Yosuke, who had been silently observing with a tense expression, didn't voice any objections. Though he appeared slightly dissatisfied, he decided to let it go for now. End-of-year class points. At the close of the year-end special exam, the approximate class points were as follows. Horikita's class had taken a slight lead in the race to Class A. Sakayanagi's class was closely pursued by Ryuen's class, holding on to a fragile lead. Meanwhile, Ichinose's class had fallen significantly behind. These were the current standings, but what truly mattered was what came next. If Sakayanagi were to be expelled, her class would inevitably face penalties. Up until now, no student in the second year had voluntarily withdrawn, so the specifics were unclear. However, based on research into past cases, a deduction of 300 class points seemed likely. This would drop Sakayanagi's class to 793 points, potentially sliding them to third place. Such a development would solidify a too-strong, too-weak dynamic among the classes. With this in mind, it seemed necessary to ramp up efforts during the upcoming spring break beyond the original plans. After school, the classroom was empty. All the students had left. Kei wanted to walk home with me, but I suggested she go with Sato and the others instead. Realizing the situation, she quickly agreed. Although the main reason Maizono had to leave was because of me, clinging to my girlfriend right after a classmate's expulsion would only worsen Kei's image. To avoid that, at least for today, I decided to head home alone. Horikita and Yosuke, who knew the situation better than anyone and intended to dig deeper, also left without lingering in the classroom. Well, time to head home, I thought as I stepped out alone. As I was about to head straight to the dormitory, "Ayanokoji-kun?" Kushida called out to me as I exited the school building. The area was deserted. She must have been waiting for me here. "I've got something to ask you. Wouldn't it be better over the phone? Worried about rumors if we're seen together?" She teased me. She was well aware of the implications. "If you're fine with that, ask away. I'm done pretending to be everyone's friend in class, so it makes more sense to confront you directly." "What are you talking about?" "Earlier, in front of everyone, I supported you and wrapped things up nicely. But let's be honest, Maizono's expulsion was intentional, wasn't it? A calculated move to clean out a traitor." "No, that's not." I started to deny, but Kushida smirked slightly and continued. "True, Ichinose was incredibly strong during this exam. But if it's you, Ayanokoji-kun, couldn't you have broken her down mentally instead with other means? Am I wrong?" Instead of praising my victory, she cleverly implied that I could use other means to break her spirit. It was a very sharp observation. Horikita and the other fools in class might see things in a positive light, but that's not how it really is, right? Kushida's keen insight came from her relentless efforts to uncover people's true intentions. And even if we lost, expelling Maizono wouldn't be a bad outcome, don't you agree? Even in defeat, losing Maizono wasn't much of a setback. Kushida deduced that this was all part of my plan. I have to say, I respect that kind of strategy. And why's that? Because you're the one who backed me into a corner and nearly got me expelled. It'd be strange if you didn't think this way. That was her main reason. She didn't bother listing any smaller details. I agreed with her logic, but decided to deflect. I only did what was necessary to win because she was a formidable opponent. She seemed to notice my evasion, but didn't press further. Putting myself aside, I have to commend your performance, Kushida. You intervened perfectly. Even though some are wary of you, many in class still acknowledged the validity of your words. The events of the special exam left a lasting impression on Kushida as well. Well, I've lost a lot and need to rebuild my position in class. If I leave everything to you, who knows what will happen next? She said, indicating her plans to secure her standing to avoid becoming a future target for expulsion. Even if it's purely self-serving, having a goal is a good thing. Horikita seems to trust you as well. Please, she and I are enemies. We're just in a temporary alliance for a common goal. Kushida would continue to navigate the class deftly in the future. Though I couldn't oversee everything, I was certain of this for the moment. Let's go back in time a little. It was when Horikita and others began discussing Maizono's withdrawal from their class. In another classroom, the end-of-year special exam reflections were also underway. Ichinose class, pushed to the brink before the exam, had no choice but to win. However, after returning with the 3 representatives alongside Hoshinomiya, all of them silently went back to their seats. In the deathly silent classroom, Ichinose sat with her head lowered, unable to lift it. Still, if she didn't take the initiative to explain, time would remain frozen. Everyone, I'm sorry. Ichinose's voice was barely squeezed out. Losing today's exam, it's my fault. Neither the participants nor the representatives knew the full details of the special exam. The battles between representatives were conducted in secrecy, with only results and personal accounts shedding light on what happened. This applied to both Horikita's class and this one. While the loss of a classmate was painful, Horikita's class had secured a victory, giving them hope to move forward. On the other hand, Ichinose's class was crushed by the weight of defeat. It should have been a bitter, heavy atmosphere that lingered, but this wasn't a class that tolerated negativity for long. Honami-chan, you don't have to apologize. I think we could have supported you better with our discussions. None of the classmates blamed Ichinose. Instead, they offered words of comfort. Yeah, it's nothing to worry about. Who said what didn't matter? Everyone chimed in with reassurances, passing supportive words like a relay baton. It wasn't anything unusual. It was simply how this class always was. When someone was sad, they lifted each other up. When someone was struggling, they gave encouragement. Blaming or attacking an individual? That didn't exist here. Of course, such positive attitudes weren't inherently wrong, but this time, the situation was different. What was happening now was mere wound-licking. Himeno watched this scene with a lump in her throat. This can't go on. That thought repeatedly surfaced in her mind. She knew the loss wasn't solely Ichinose's fault. As others had said, there were areas where the participants could have done better, and Himeno herself hadn't delivered praiseworthy results. However, avoiding the reality of the loss wouldn't lead to growth. Himeno understood this. She needed to speak up, to steer the class into reflecting on the loss as a crucial turning point for their future. But she couldn't. The words that reached her throat were swallowed back down. Himeno had always disliked and avoided standing out. Muster up courage now? Easier said than done. Her palms were sweaty. Her lips remained tightly sealed. Her vision wavered, and her head started to ache. As always, in front of others, she was unable to express her thoughts. Still, Himeno was starting to change. Though she had always been alone, she now had peers who understood her. Desperate, Himeno glanced at Kanzaki, hoping he would break the silence first and give her the opportunity to speak. This group was formed to create a space where they could voice opinions, even to Ichinose. If Kanzaki spoke first, she could follow. That was her small but significant resolve. But Kanzaki didn't move. He sat with his head down, motionless, as if waiting for time to pass. Himeno turned to another ally, Hamaguchi, with a pleading look. Hamaguchi noticed her gaze but shook his head slightly, signaling that if Kanzaki wasn't acting, it wasn't the right time yet. Left without support, Himeno could only watch as time slipped away. Right now, we might just be facing a small crisis, but there is still a long way to go. Shibata, standing by Ichinose's side, encouraged her strongly, throwing up his fist, clenched fists raised in a gesture of determination. This loss? So what? We've got a whole year ahead of us, don't we, everyone? He tried to rally the classroom with his cheerful words, but reality was harsh. far harsher than Himeno's inner thoughts could accept. Unable to voice her concerns, Himeno was forced to go along with the optimistic mood. Watching the scene with an icy gaze was none other than their homeroom teacher, Hoshinomiya. She clenched her fists, holding back the urge to intervene. As a teacher, she was bound by the school's rule of minimal interference. But her patience was wearing thin. Raising her hand high, she slammed it onto the podium. The lively atmosphere froze instantly. "Everyone, do you even understand the situation you're in?" Her voice was calm, but her words pierced sharply through the air. "To put it bluntly, you're all being delusional." The smiles on the students' faces stiffened. "Chi-sensei?" A male student timidly called out, but Hoshinomiya ignored him, turning her attention to Shibata. "Shibata-kun, you said there is still a long way to go, didn't you?" Yes. "Do you really believe that?" "Well, it's too soon to give up, isn't it? If we compare this to soccer, even if we're behind by 2 or 3 points, once we regain control of the momentum." 2 or 3 points? Momentum? Stop kidding yourself. This loss is far more devastating. "No, but teacher, if we still have a year." "A year left?" "No, you're misunderstanding. There's only 1 year left." "But there's still a chance for a comeback." "There isn't." Let me put it in terms of your favorite soccer analogy. This isn't just about trailing by 2 points. We've already lost 3 points today alone, and now we're down by 10. I'm asking if you understand what that means, and our opponent is far beyond our current level. It's time you accept reality. Unable to tolerate their denial any longer, Hoshinomiya Chie spoke sharply to the students. Yet, despite this, Shibata refused to give up. "Teacher, have you heard of the giant killing? If it were us." Note, The Giant Killing is a Japanese soccer manga by Tsunomoto Masaya. The manga highlights themes of teamwork, strategy, and overcoming odds. Enough. What you need right now isn't to dream up scenarios, but to face reality. Do you understand? Hoshinomiya had to drag her lost students out of the forest of wishful thinking and back into reality. For the first time, they saw Hoshinomiya truly angry. Shibata, who had been trying to argue, swallowed his words and, as if directed, turned away and left. Passing by Ichinose, he returned to his seat with reluctance. "It's over for us, isn't it, Ichinose?" Hoshinomiya approached Ichinose, who had been silently lowering her head, and spoke to her. "Sensei?" Hoshinomiya, who had closely observed their struggles in the exams, understood the toll Ayanokoji's blow had taken on Ichinose's spirit. The reality was clear. This class had no chance of winning anymore. "It's on me. That was my responsibility. From here on out, I don't have confidence that I can continue as the leader of this class." Ichinose spoke of stepping down, but Hoshinomiya stopped her before she could finish. "That's not it." "What? I'm not asking you to give up. I just want you to see the situation for what it is." Moments ago, she had been furious, but now Hoshinomiya's voice softened into a warm smile. "We've lost this time, and if we keep going as we are, we'll lose in the future too. You're not giving up, not yet. Do you understand that?" "Yes." Even if she didn't want to admit it, the harsh truth from someone sincere was impossible to refute. Ichinose could only nod. Satisfied, Hoshinomiya nodded back. "It's fine, Ichinose. I believe in your potential. Leave all your worries to me." She gently patted Ichinose on the shoulder and whispered into her ear. If she allowed Ichinose to resign now, it would create even greater chaos for the class's future. Hoshinomiya decided to delay that decision, knowing it was the best move for now. "So, for now, take it slow. Rest and recover, all right?" With that, Hoshinomiya stepped away, returning to her usual demeanor. It was clear to her, this class couldn't escape the depths of D class on their own. The only option left was for her to intervene, breaking the rules if necessary to save them. For now, she placed her hopes on Ichinose, but only to prevent the class from collapsing during this fragile time. That's enough heavy talk for today. While we can't change the results of this time, the next time will be different. Spring break is just around the corner, and so are your 3-way meetings. You should start thinking about your future plans. Hoshinomiya announced the dismissal, unwilling to linger in the suffocating atmosphere of the classroom any longer. Following her crushing defeat against Ayanokoji, Ichinose, unable to bear the weight of her failure, took sick leave and never appeared at school again before spring break. Thus began her dark, solitary vacation in her room.